36. They parted. He looked down at the crystal, his hand hovering over it. There was no shaking. He felt his doubts leaving him, and he touched it with his palm. The moment he touched it, a darkness rose up from nowhere and engulfed him, leaving him floating in a pure dark void, alone. All was quiet. So purely, devastatingly quiet that it was like sound was a foreign concept here. It felt dangerous to even try to speak, but he did.
"Sophie? Is this supposed to happen?"
he said, but the moment the words left his lips, they seemed to evaporate into nothing, and he was not even sure he had spoken in the first place. He turned this way and that, seeing nothing but a great black void, and himself. Despite the lack of light, he could see himself perfectly fine. But no, that was not right. He was lit, but from where? Finally he looked up, and there was indeed a light, but the moment he beheld it was like he did not see it with his eyes, but experienced it with every sense, and more that he did not have names for. The light was like a spear through his eye into his mind, and out the back. He felt impaled by it, sacrificed to it. Ah, one has come. You seek power? The voice was inside his very bones, resonating from within him, like he was a string on a harp.
"Yes. Please, I need the final spirit,"
he shouted, trying to reach this infinitely distant yet omnipresent being. The words sounded like the softest breath of wind in comparison. "It is forbidden. Why do you seek power?"
I need it to save the world."
"Useless. I will see for myself." Suddenly he felt open, exposed in a way he could never imagine, like he had been cracked open like an egg, and each piece of himself was pulled out and examined with the exactness of a clockmaker. Cold air on his bones, his nerves, his muscles, like each layer of him was separated and sorted and arrayed on a table as easily as he would have pulled a piece off from the middle of a puzzle. His every instinct was to scream and shake from the pain, but he was unable to move even the slightest. He could not twitch an eyelid, nor take the slightest breath. Simultaneously, his body was agony, and yet it felt nothing. "I see. You are death." At last he could speak.
"What? No. I'm trying to stop death. I'm trying to get the power to destroy Dahlgren."
Through a childish impulse to impress a rival, you have doomed the world through incompetence and ignorance. Since then you have been like a wild beast, chasing down every possible solution to bring about your salvation. From the very beginning you have longed for death, and killed more people than you can even count to achieve that goal at any cost. And you would ask of me to give this power unto a person such as this? The words cut through him, down to his very core. He could not deny them, nor refute, nor excuse them. He knew it would be useless against whatever this being was. He begged,
"Please. There is no one else."
There was more tearing at him, more picking apart, and examining. His mind was unraveled and rolled back up in the space of a thought. "No, there is not. Not even the girl. Still, it is better that you do not receive this power."
"What? Why? Please, I have to."
There was a sensation like all his pieces of himself slamming back together, and then he felt crushed in a tight grip. The light grew somehow even more intense. Though it did not burn him, it seemed to go through his skin and shine out the back of him. His bones ached with the force and conviction of the voice. "Because you are not worthy. Because to give one such as you the power would be an even greater doom. And not simply upon this moon of Lennis, but upon the whole universe. You would dare to ask me to make a god of a child, and then say this is wisdom."
"You're wrong,"
he yelled, though it felt so pathetic in comparison to this being.
"I don't know what you mean by all this god stuff. But who are you to tell me what I'd do? I'm trying to save Lennis, I swear it."
"You dare question me? The one who has read you through like a book, and seen all there is to be seen? You add pride and delusion to your crimes?"
"No, this isn't pride. This is necessity. The world is in danger, and unless I do something, it will be destroyed. Can't you see that?
And then what? When you have saved this world, will you never again use the power? Will you have the strength to deny it? To resist temptation? This power is forbidden, because it must never be used.
If that is the promise I must make, then I'll make it. I swear on my life, on everything I am, I will only use this power to save the world from this one threat, and never again. No matter what.
Arrogance. And what if a new threat comes? One in which no other power will do. Will you still abide the promise?
Should I not if nothing else will do? That doesn't make any sense.
And here we see the delusion that leads to damnation. The threats will never cease, and soon there is no end to the uses of this power. Soon, no one else fit to lead such as you. None fit to rule but you. And why should you not? Are you not a Ragan of the chosen immortals? Are you not the most strong, most wise? Who else better fit than a god?
I'm not like that. I'm not like Zagos.
To me, all are as the Zagos. Begone from me. Return again, and I will destroy you so utterly, it will be as if you never existed. He felt himself begin to rise, for the darkness around him to pull away. The grip around him loosen.
No!
He screamed, and he struggled vainly to not rise away.
Don't send me back. I'm not leaving here without that power, no matter what it takes. If you won't give it to me, you might as well just kill me now.
The darkness stopped peeling away from around him, and he stopped rising. The invisible grip around his body seemed to tighten once more, and the light drew closer. This is your final chance, child. Agree that you are unworthy, and you may leave with your life.
No. I won't go. I don't know if I'm worthy of this or not, but I have no other choice than to try.
The grip tightened even further, and he felt like he was being pushed or thrown through the air. The great light seemed to part in the middle, and an intense red eye seemed to push its way through and stare into him and through him. Fine then. I shall be your teacher, as well as your judge. You will learn humility. You will learn just how unworthy you are. You will burn in the fires of my judgment until there is nothing left. His body slammed into a surface, and he was pressed so firmly against it that he could not shift his body in the smallest degree. Then he heard a terrible noise like an explosion from far away, growing closer and closer. Chedsney, you shall know of me as doth. Find the truth in the maze or find death. And then a great power burst forth from the eye that he could not comprehend, but it wiped away his flesh just as easily as a hurricane would blow out a candle. He felt every mote of himself be obliterated, and his scream echoed through all of time and blackness, and then he was no more. He awoke with a gasp, sucking in air like he had been drowning for his whole life. His body was whole and unblemished, but the echo, the memory of his utter dissolution was fresh in his mind. Was it all a dream? He thought. But that did not feel quite right as an explanation. No dream had ever felt like that. No nightmare. It was all impossible, and yet it had felt real. It was real. He sat up and looked around. He was sat upon a large pane of something white and crystalline. It was smooth and cool to the touch, like glass, but the surface seemed to reflect things in an unintuitive way. All around him were walls of clear glass, with more and more walls as far as he could see in all directions. They were not perfectly clear, though. There was a certain smokiness to them, and they had that same odd reflective property the floor had. He stood and looked keenly around.
Hello?
He called.
What is this place? What's going on?
There was no answer. His voice felt so small here, it made him feel uncomfortable even speaking. Then he looked at the sky. It was dark, but not empty. Not exactly. There was a distinct feeling like he was in the center of a sphere, and the walls of it curved all around him. From below to above, a strange pulse propagated like a wave around the surface, turning the inky blankness from black to purple, then pale white, and back again. Regular, rhythmic, like a heartbeat. And as he made that realization, found that there was a subtle thump sound with every pulse as well. He wondered if it was somehow his own heart he was hearing from within his chest. With no response and no clue what to do, he simply began to walk. His footsteps resonated over the walls and floor with perfect harmonic tones, like the crystalline panels were all humming bells. Despite his feelings of isolation and exposure, he decided to call out one more time.
Sophie? Can you hear me? Can anyone?
He waited for his voice to stop whispering back to him from the myriad reflections. There was no response. He found the way he walked to be twisting and confusing. Beside the smoky walls, all being difficult to tell apart from one another, and also the difficulty of being able to tell apart a wall from an opening. The paths he walked would branch off, and turn on themselves, or dead end, endlessly. As a test, he tried to mar the surface with his sword as a marker, but there was not a single scratch. Similarly, he tried to smear the walls with oil or other things, but nothing would stick, and they would evaporate almost instantly. Nothing for it, he walked on. He tried to remember the paths he walked, but the same featureless expanse greeted him wherever he went. It was then that he noticed one feature that he had not noticed when he had first awoken. There, off in the distance before him, was a pillar of light. Its shape was so pure and straight that he could not even tell how far away it was, only that it was there. He made for it, though he would often need to take different paths when he would find himself at a dead end.
Find the truth in the maze. That's what the voice said.
He said to himself, just as much to remind himself he was real as to remember his purpose here. His heart told him that it was his goal to reach it. His footsteps picked up the pace. He felt along the walls with one hand, trying to find the gaps just that more easily. That's when he saw it. As he passed through one four-way junction, just out of the corner of his eye was some flash of light. He staggered to a stop and ran back to see what he had seen. But the corridor was empty. He didn't want to acknowledge the very real possibility that he was already seeing things in this featureless expanse. But he also couldn't shake the feeling that it had been real. It looked all too much like the great red eye that had found him and opened him and destroyed him.
Doth,
he said, whispering so quietly. The thing was in the maze with him. The mere idea was enough to drain the life from him, and it was as if all the blood had drained from his limbs. His fingertips were stiff and cold. His legs trembled. No, don't think about it. Just find your way. Stay quiet. You can do this, he thought to himself. Again he began to walk. This time he stayed close to the wall, his fingers tracing the smoothness, and always his neck turned this way and that. The light seemed no closer, but he doggedly continued. Half an hour, perhaps more, passed. He seemed no closer to the light, but it was impossible to tell. Always he walked towards it. It must be getting closer, he just could not tell the true distance. And he had not seen another glimpse of Doth, and began to think that perhaps he truly had imagined it. And soon he lost his thoughts to the slow pulsing beat that suffused this place as he walked. His thoughts strayed to what Doth had said, that he was unworthy, and he could not disagree. But it still stung to have his heart's true fear laid bare to him so dispassionately, like there was no argument. This journey, it should never have been him. Every step had been a mistake, a foolish random accident that each day they did not fail. But that didn't change the fact that now, there was no one else. If it was not him, it was no one. Was that not enough for this being? Would it doom a whole world rather than give him the power to save it? Yes. 1,000 times yes. The voice was 1,000 trumpets through his very mind, and it sent him to his knees, clutching at his head like it would split apart. The voice seemed to come from his back. He turned. He saw. Close, so close, there was the great unblinking red eye. If that eye had gazed upon him from across the universe, he would still tremble and fear and run. but it was just a few lengths away. He screamed in terror and ran. It was fast, so terribly, damnably fast. At his best run, it was still twice as fast as he was. But the worst of it was that it made no noise as it moved. It was terrifying and alien and unstoppable, and it was coming right for him. He ran around a corner and felt the noose tightening. His heart seemed to beating as the feeling of doom descended upon him. His suspicion was confirmed when he turned one final corner and was stopped short by a dead-end wall. He turned and pressed his back to it, face pale and breath ragged, to find Doth there before him. You, who would become a god, die 1,000 deaths. That same light that had burned through him and destroyed him was growing before the being, and it sent Chesney's mind into a panic. And in nothing but screaming desperation, he blasted forth a fire with all the power he could bear, and more. So much of his life did he press into the attack that, even if it had worked, it might fell him regardless. Fire so bright and hot it seared his own eyes, roaring so loud that his eardrums were destroyed. The very air in his lungs sizzled. When at last his life was nearly all spent, the attack sputtered to nothingness, and before him was Doth, unhurt, unmarred, not even the tiniest blemish or damage. Power against power, and what will you do when your foe is greater, or faster, or smarter? And in that great eye he saw himself reflected, and beyond that he saw his every failure and weakness. Saw those he had let down, or let die, or killed. Saw the world burn and be cold and empty. Saw the let-down faces of those who loved him and trusted him. All of them were behind him, and he felt their hate and disappointment and judgment as strongly as any fire. Once again, light from the being blasted him and through him, and until even his ashes were no more. He woke up screaming and gasping for air once more. And once more, his body was whole. He curled his knees to his chest and cried and shook until the being found him again. And again he was destroyed. He awoke again, screaming,
"What do you want from me?"
But there was no answer. He knew then. It didn't want anything from him. He was unworthy. He was warned. And now he would pay. Over and over again, he would pay. Over and over again he tried. He ran. He fought. He died. He lived again and raged and wept. And over again it would taunt him. What would he do against a foe that was faster, stronger, and smarter than him? What did that leave? Was this a test, or just a cruel punishment meant to drive him mad from his own hubris? All through his journey he had relied on others when things had gotten too hard for him to do alone. But now he was alone. Every trick he tried, all his power, it all meant nothing here. Every second of this hell was an agonizing reminder that he was unworthy. Every death seemed to expose and judge him for some new flaw. Every piece of him was ripped out and shoved in his very face, forcing him to see it, and acknowledge it, and own it. The first deaths were all ones of despair. He had felt so lost and alone, and each time he saw Doth he would try to run, and fail, and collapse, and die. There were times he would find himself near the light that was his goal, could see it shining like the sun before him, but be denied each time. But soon he replaced his grief with anger, limitless, unending rage and hate for this being, this thing that punished him for simply wanting to save the world, to make up for his mistakes, who unjustly punished him over and over and over and over and over, more and more and again, and burning him and destroying him, and exposing him for all the things he would never admit he hated about himself. When at last his endless rage had been spent, he begged for release, begged to be allowed to give up, that he had accepted his unworthiness and that he would find some other way. But his pleas fell on deaf ears, and he died and died. He despaired then, true, absolute, had made peace that he would never see anyone ever again, almost forgotten their names. He only longed now for one thing, the final death, to not need to endure this torment any further, to accept that he was not in control, never had been in control, and that he only wished for an end. And even that was denied him. Perhaps he went a little mad along the way. Upon his latest awakening, after begging and begging for a final death, and being denied, he sat up, and his mind was just an utter blank. All that had made him who he was had been burned and blown away like dust. His sense of self had been eroded and polished smooth, as if by sand. For 3 cycles he sat and waited, his mind empty, allowed the end to come and pass and return. And upon his 4th awakening then, he felt something hard within him. Some small piece of himself that was not gone. Something that had endured and hardened like diamond. Up until now, he had despaired that nothing in this hellish place ever changed. But now he saw that was not true. If he could not change this place, there was something that could. Himself.
Not worthy?
He whispered. So weak and quiet it was like it had never been uttered. He looked at his hands, and clenched them into fists.
Then I will make myself worthy.
He stood. He ran. There was no hunger here, no exhaustion from hours walking. His 10,000th step was as easy as his first. Never again did he wander the halls aimless and confused. He remembered. The paths became familiar. Never again did he look upon Doth and scream or run. He watched. He learned. And soon he understood. The one advantage he had in this place. The one flaw in this game. Doth had to win an infinite number of times. Chesney only needed to win once. Doth was indeed more powerful and faster than Chesney, but he was beginning to understand that smarter was not necessarily true. One attempt, Chesney remembered every path he took and the exact pace he had taken. He recreated every footfall, every breath, exactly as it had been, and he had been captured in exactly the same way. Which meant Doth was predictable. He just had to understand how to use that to his advantage. And soon he found it. He awoke, stood, and ran. He made for Doth, from the direction he knew he would encounter him soonest. Planned his footfalls flawlessly, watched through the smoky glass for Doth to approach him through the maze, to take the twisting path that would bring them together. Doth was fast. Still, so impossibly fast. He planned the exact moment, the exact spot that Doth would come to him. He could see the intersection, his heart hammering in his chest as he ran, but not tired in the slightest. Could almost feel Doth gaining, just on the other side of the wall, that ocean of power lapping against him in waves. His feet pressed into the glass in the middle of a 4-way intersection, and out of the corner of his eye, there was Doth. It lunged after him, and missed, and in its haste had dove into the opposite corridor. And rather than pursue him, Doth had continued onward in the other corridor, and now ran along with him from beyond the other wall. Chesney grinned. His heart blazed in triumph and pride. For all its speed, Doth never stopped, never turned around, not unless it found itself trapped in a dead-end hall. And that was how he would beat it. Doth did not speak to his mind this time. He did not speak to it. But he could feel something different in the air. Annoyance, concern, perhaps. Chesney was coming up to another junction, but so too was Doth in his own section of the maze. And the paths that led from both were long, and did not have many branches, but all led to very different places. And Doth would have no choice but to reach theirs first.
Which one am I going to take, big guy?
He couldn't help but ask.
Where am I going to end up? You'll have to pick.
Just as he had predicted, Doth took the path that was in his direction.
Ha! I knew it!
He crowed. He could almost feel it snarling in rage as it discovered it had entered a dead end. And Chesney dashed through the intersection and took a path that kept them far apart. The maze rang out in pure tones in time to his footfalls, and he realized that he was stepping in time with the beating of this very world. In the back of his mind he counted. 8. Every 8 steps, a new beat. Over and over he counted his footfalls from 1 to 8 and started over. Fire, sphere, light, sky, air, water, heart, earth. Time seemed to slow as he ran, and he found himself repeating the spirits in his mind now, with each footfall. Fire, theorin, light, sky, air, water, heart, earth. One seemed to flow into the other, like a conversation. He felt something building within him, like a tiny piece of his soul was passed from one to the other. With each spirit he was changed. Each time he was passed, it was like he was given the answer before he heard the question, and then sent to the next with a new answer, and the next question. How had he not seen before how the power seemed to flow? Fire to sphere, to light, to sky, to air, to water, to heart, to earth. Every time he would get to earth, it was like a dagger in his heart, and his spirits would cry out, and wail, and dash upon themselves, and start again. How had he not felt this agony before? How had he not noticed the great mourning of the spirits for their lack of their brother? It was like hearing a story, and each new detail brought some new and greater understanding, truth, and wonder, only to have the final page be ripped off and nowhere to be found. His heart pounded in his chest, and his mind throbbed, and he almost wanted to cry from the sense of loss. But then he felt it. The pull. The light. It was there. Earth was there, waiting. All of them were waiting. And his soul cried out for relief. And Doth cried out for his blood. From behind him now he could feel the being's rage as it pursued him and gained upon him, pushing him forward. Felt the pull of the light, so close now, dragging him to it. Unworthy. Unworthy. Unworthy.
I finally understand, Doth.
Chesney yelled, not looking back, eyes forward, his feet taking him closer and closer.
What it means to be worthy, and the only one who can decide that is me.
Just as Doth was upon him, and he could feel the light of its gaze pouring at him and through him, so too did he reach the light in the center and enter it. It was like pure compassion and wisdom and understanding and power. Once more he felt his mind become open, his body torn apart like a puzzle and laid bare for the universe to see. But there was no pain, there was only joy. He was no longer ashamed. The light of it did not burn him. He did not feel exposed and judged, but he stood and felt pride in who he was. He was sure now. This was who he was, and the universe could take it, or leave it. And so, you have come to me again, and you have learned, and you finally judge yourself worthy.
Yes. Is this how everyone is tested?
No. In truth, the test is always one devised by the one who comes. You have set a particularly cruel test, Chesney, but it has changed you. The last doubts within you are now gone. Tell me, what have you come to understand of the spirits?
I feel the connection between them. I feel the flow from one to the other, but it is interrupted. It's awful. How did I never truly feel this before?
You did not feel it because you were not yet open to the experience. But I shall grant you the power of earth and make you whole. He felt it then, like a door opening in his mind to find an old friend he had never met but always known. And as they connected, there was understanding.
What am I feeling here?
He asked, almost breathless, and his mind and soul soared. The universe. It will take you time to fully understand this, Chesney. But when you do, you will discover the last truth, the final truth, and why this power must never ever be used again. But I know that you will understand. Now go. Show me the power that you now possess. The light that had welcomed him and held him and shown him the truth now put him back together, and placed him back at the center of the maze. Slowly, calmly, he turned, and there was Doth, waiting to destroy him once again. Chesney raised a single hand and held it before him. The voice was right. He did not fully understand it. The knowledge and wisdom of something was rattling within his mind, connecting things, revealing things, but it was too much to grasp all at once, too much to hold on to yet. But he did understand enough. He held court with all the spirits in his mind, and they answered his call. Together they sang in him and through him, a song so beautiful that he could try his whole existence to write down and share and not capture. One by one, manifestations of the spirits appeared around him. Fire, sphere, light, sky, air, water, heart, earth, ethereal copies of himself that sang and embodied the aspect of itself, and it was like the curtain of the universe was torn back to reveal the great machinery behind. But it was not all power and awareness. The strain upon his body was immense. His very life was draining from him as quickly as if he had slit his own throat and was bleeding upon the ground in a great waterfall. The strain was double, no, triple, the strength of even his most demanding spells. But he knew he had enough. Doth had not waited idly to be destroyed. As Chesney came to grasp his newfound power, Doth was glowing with his own power, the light of his judgment, and ready to unleash it upon him. A part of Chesney felt fear, but at the same moment came calm and understanding. He was reflected in that eye, but all of his regrets were gone. All the faces were gone. The light erupted against him, and passed him by without harm. There was only him, and he did not judge himself any more. In the next instant, another light, a greater light, erupted from Chesney, and Doth was engulfed. Like countless small supernovas, explosions destroyed Doth and took piece after piece after piece away from him, until there was nothing left him. And in the next instant he was awake, on his back, cradled in Medeia's arms on the floor of Sophie's home, and tears fell upon his face. He smiled softly, moved his hand to cup her face.
It's okay. I'm back. I know the answer now.
He didn't know how many times he had died in the dream. All that he had lost to the great ocean of time spent there came back to him, and all the terrible ordeals he had felt washed away from him. All was compressed once more into a single moment, a single truth, to that hard diamond piece of himself that withstood it all, and now knew the answer. I am enough.